Well, good morning. Good morning, and how are you? Good to see you. Good to see you all. This is the office hours recap stream that I promised. Um, if you're not sure what that means, over the last 2 weeks, I held what are called office hours. Um, my previous career was as a professor. Holding office hours was a thing that I would regularly do to have students come and just like say hi and want to ask questions about anything that we're talking about in class or anything else. Office hours are nice. Hey, BLG, good to see you. Office hours are nice, and I thought, okay, why not try and do something similar for the RPG space? I have been doing this design thing for about 5 years. I've gathered up some degree of experience and knowledge, and I thought that that might be a helpful thing to share with people. So what I did is for the last 2 weeks, I ran office hours, and people had to sign up for them. It wasn't just sort of like an open door thing. They signed up through like they filled out a Google form. We found times that worked, and I gave people up to 30 minutes of time to just chat. They would oftentimes come. I encourage people to come with questions, some idea of something that they wanted to talk about. And then once the office hour session started, it was just whatever they wanted to talk about for 30 minutes. It was a really cool experience. I had 29 people ultimately sign up for it over the 2 week period, which was super cool. It was cool to just have that many people be interested in talking. Um, a cool thing to note about that 29 is that for the most part, I had not had many, if any, direct contact interactions with these folks. Maybe like the occasional thing on like Blue Sky / Twitter or something like that is just like a quick back and forth, but very few of these people would be people that I would say I know very well. Um, which is cool. Like it was an opportunity to connect with people that I had not connected with yet. So that alone made it a very fulfilling experience. Um, it was great also talking to like friends who signed up as well, just because yeah, cool. Like getting to hang out with John Boyle and chat was fun. But that's always fun. So what I sort of promised is that I would do a recap stream that would go over some of like the most common recurring questions or topics that were brought up during office hours. Obviously, during this recap, I'm not going to go as deep into any of these things as I did with individual people, just because with each person, we had up to 30 minutes to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. We're not going to spend that long on each of these things, but I just kind of took quick notes for myself so that I could give a set of generic blanket advice that seemed to be consistently stuff folks wanted to know more about, um, that I had some thoughts on. And so that's what this is. That's what this stream is just going to be me talking about that stuff for a little bit. If folks are watching this live and they have additional questions, I'm fine with fielding more questions. They could be new things or asking about these. If you're watching this on the VOD later and you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll try to answer them. Obviously, in comments, I can't be nearly as detailed as if we were just chatting here and stream together, but I'm trying to remain an open source of knowledge. I think that's an important part of my history as a scientist, as an academic, is about the distribution, free flowing distribution of knowledge. So I would like to do that. I probably won't continue to do office hours purely from a practical standpoint of I will just have far less time in the near future to do things like that. They will have to be much more intentional. And we'll talk about that intentionality at the end. So, without further ado, what was office hours about, or what did we generally talk about? Lots and lots of people wanted to know about going full time. Many of the people who I talked to were early in their career as designers. I put career in quotes because a lot of these folks doing game design is not their full-time job. It is something that they do either for fun and or they see it as a path that could be a job that they want to do, but they're not sure how to do that yet. And so a lot of people were curious, hey, how did you ultimately, because I have very recently made the decision to switch to doing game design full time. And a lot of people were curious about that full time journey. And I'm not going to give you like the full history of how I started design and how I ended up where I am. But what I largely told folks is that there are three major factors that were involved in me making the decision to go full time. The first is financial. I had talked with my wife years ago once I started having some success in this space of like kind of like flirted with the idea of like, hey, I'm pretty good at this. What about doing it as my job? We kind of laughed and then we talked about it and we came up with a number, like a number that I had to make net, not like gross, but like the profit that I had to make in a year for it to be financially viable for our home. Um, and we also came up with the agreement that that couldn't just happen one time. It couldn't happen just 1 year. It had to be demonstrated multiple times so that there was consistency. That was really important because, to give you some context, 2023 was a really good year. And the reason 2023 was a really good year is because at the tail end of 22, I released Rune. And Rune, as you might have seen in some of my other streams, is my biggest and most popular game. And so that basically kind of like, since it was the end of 22, carried most of 23. And so it looked like a great year. And the question is that a fluke? Is that okay, that one game took off. What about, can you do that again and again? So there had to be consistency. And since I've been demonstrating consistency, that we checked that first box. The second box is, as I've mentioned before, we're having a baby soon. We're having our first kid soon, which is very, very exciting. And we have sort of made the decision that we would like to have one of us home for that. And so me doing full-time game design is something that I can do from home, while also staying home with our child. And also childcare is just insanely expensive. I will be the childcare, which is something that I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to be a dad. I kind of just love the idea of being home with my kids. So that was two. And then three was more of a mental health sort of thing, which is my job. If as I've mentioned, I still technically am a professor of psychology, and I won't get into the details of it, but I don't want to be a professor of psychology. There are many things that kind of moved me into this path that if I had my shot at it again, I wouldn't have gone down this path. And so my job is very not just unfulfilling, but very draining for a number of different reasons. And I found the thing that fills my cup, which is game design. I love doing this thing. I mean, I've been a game designer since I was 5 years old. And so I finally kind of found the thing and am doing the thing that makes me super, super happy and fulfilled. And so my wife is unbelievably supportive of that idea. And so those three things kind of came together to make it, okay, I can do this thing full time. So I kind of expressed that to folks who are curious about this because, like I said, a lot of the people that I were talking to were very early in their design stuff, maybe had made one thing or were working on their first thing. And so I wanted to sort of emphasize, I didn't make the decision to go full time after doing this for 1 year. I am now, like I said, in my 5th year of doing this. So it took time before I felt comfortable doing that. So yeah, that's the full-time journey concept. Yeah, BLG, I can't wait. I absolutely can't wait. It's going to be pretty cool. All right, so next was, where do I get inspiration for like the mechanics that I do? A lot of folks know me as somebody who is mechanics focused. They know me as a rules design sort of person, which I'm happy for folks to know me as that. I think that's a nice niche, or a nice sort of subcategory to be known for. And so people were curious, like, how do you come up with mechanics and where does this stuff come from? And I think it's, I don't hide it that I take inspiration from other things. um, I talk to a lot of people about how I don't play a lot of role playing games. Certainly, I play a lot less of them today than I used to. What I played now, and I've always played, are video games and board games. Video games and board games I play a lot of, and they are a vast swath of inspiration for us to be pulling from. Uh, the asymmetry of Slayers comes from asymmetry in games like Root, where four different factions are playing the same game but wildly different. And I thought, why can't we do that in role playing games? And so I largely look to other sources as things that I find mechanically interesting. And then I think, okay, what of that can transfer over to the tabletop cleanly and what can't? And a thing that I've learned early on is that, like, trying to force something that I saw was very cool somewhere else and force it into the tabletop isn't always a good idea. Or it's going to have to change quite a bit. But honestly, for me, inspiration for mechanics doesn't come from role playing games. It comes from other types of games. And I think that's probably why folks recognize me as a mechanics person, because like board games and card games are, in my opinion, more mechanically defined than most role playing games. And video games are too. And there's a reason for that, right? Because like there's no one person who like runs the game. There's no game master in these things. So the game has to work. The mechanics have to work. And I find that to be a really compelling space to look to. Another thing that folks a lot wanted to talk about was marketing, which is one of those things that we just generally don't like to do, which makes sense. And so a lot of people were saying, like, how do you get your game out there? How do you get people to notice it? There's a lot of different ways, but the two things that I oftentimes brought up with people are press kits and itch followers. So press kits are fantastic tools. Plus One EXP years ago for Zine Month did a really cool video on this. If I remember, I'll try to put the video link on the screen and or like in the description about how to make a press kit, and included a template that you can sort of copy and paste. And it's it's unbelievably helpful. It's a quick like 1 to 2 page presser that has a short description of your thing, bullet point information of what people need to know, and you can send that out intentionally. I also told everybody, like, listen, who do you send it to? That really depends on the type of game that you're making. But like at the very least, you should set up a publisher account on Rascal News, because they allow folks to put their announcements through their announcement feed. And using a press kit for that announcement allows you to have a very clean and obviously well put together announcement, as opposed to just sort of like typing your thoughts into that page. So press kits are great. BLG says the mechanics have to work is both an important part of board game video games and a wonderfully amusing, loving indictment of TTRPGs. Yeah, I mean, I like fully in my games, like I even wrote it in Thorn, like this game has holes in it because I don't know, I just can't possibly predict it all, and I want you to fill those holes, which I think is both a lovely and frustrating thing about TTRPGs. So yes, press kits are one thing. Itch followers is another thing that I have been really focusing on lately. I've been talking to a lot of people about this. Anytime you post something on Blue Sky or even through like your mailing list or Substack or whatever, only a small percentage of your audience is actually going to engage with that, especially if it's like a social media post, which is why you have to kind of like repeatedly post things over and over again in order to get like your audience to actually see it. What is another cool thing that you can do is encourage people to follow you on Itch. A lot of people that I were talking to it was interesting. A lot of folks that I talked to either didn't know about itch or were unsure about itch. Um, or hadn't really set anything up, which I think was surprising to me because itch has always been the place since I started doing this, as like that's where I would go and post my stuff and find stuff. A lot of folks are obviously very familiar with Drive Through RPG, um, which has a whole host of issues that we don't need to get into. But what I have emphasized more lately is for folks to follow on itch. And I'm going to go through and like update all my pages and stuff like that to kind of encourage that more, because when somebody follows a creator on itch sends you like a daily digest email. Like they'll send you emails automated throughout the day that says, hey, did you know that 2 creators you follow um, made some cool new stuff? And you go, oh, I didn't know that. And now suddenly you're there. Even your front page of itch will have a section that says things from people you follow that you haven't clicked on yet. So you can go look, you're being shown things of the people that you follow when you're casually browsing or you're checking your email. And then also on top of that, the feed button at the top of the screen lights up whenever people you follow post devlogs or update their games or post new games. So like let an automated system do that work for you. It's so helpful. Um and so I am currently sitting at I just crossed 5,000 followers on itch, which is great. That's 5,000 people that yes, probably follow me in some capacity in other places, but like I said, are not consistently seeing the things that I'm posting in those places. And now I can just kind of count on the fact that they are going to be told about stuff automatically by itch. This is not the same thing as using the email system in itch, which is you can use it, don't abuse it. I know people who abuse the email system in itch or have, and it's really annoying. I don't encourage you to do that unless you've sort of set up with your people that this is the intention of this interaction on itch. But the automated emails, the feed, the things you follow or creators you follow section, let all of that do work for you. So yeah, that's the marketing stuff we talked about. Self-publishing. So obviously a lot of folks are interested in self-publishing. And so the kind of the things that came up were, how should I do this thing? Should I do a crowdfunding or should I get somebody else to publish my game for me? Largely what I told folks is, most of the time, most of us are doing this as a self-publishing thing, which means you're doing your own crowdfunding or just releasing of the game. We'll talk about having other people publish your stuff in just a second, but there are lots of ways that you can do crowdfunding. There are obviously things like Kickstarter. Kickstarter is helpful. It helps sometimes when you're doing Kickstarters during periods like Zine Quest, which is upon us here very soon, to have that momentum. My very first game that I ever created was a part of Zine Quest. It had a $500 goal, and I hit $1,000 on it. And I was an absolute nobody. A non-presence in the scene. But the very fact that I was part of an event that had a lot of eyes and momentum on it helped a lot. Obviously, that manifests in other sorts of things, like when the Mothership people did their big Mothership collab crowdfunding thing. You don't have to do it during those events, but as a first-time person, it can certainly be helpful. BackerKit is another crowdfunding option. I talked to a few folks about that. I've done one crowdfunding campaign through BackerKit. It's cool. They have a bunch of tools that I wish Kickstarter had, but it just simply doesn't have as big of an audience. That's not to say that you can't be successful on BackerKit. Obviously you can, and there are plenty of examples. But Kickstarter's audience and Kickstarter's automated marketing is just hard to fight against, hard to argue against when you have options. The other option, though, is what about Crowdfunder? I mean, again, it's the same sort of thing, right? Like Crowdfunder don't use GameFound, BackerKit. They're fine, but if you want eyes, go to the platform that has the most eyes. Is sort of the honest answer to it. The other option that folks should consider is itch funding. Itch funding is sort of it's a cool, we have created this way of doing crowdfunding on itch. That's not actually how itch works. But what itch funding is you post your game up on itch, you put it on sale, but you usually put it on sale for like 1% off or 1% more expensive. The reason you put it on sale is because when you make a sale, you can make a goal, which is your funding goal. And then now you have the meter at the top of the screen that shows that you are filling towards that goal. It looks like a crowdfunder now. And you can set up the itch page to have, places along that goal where it's funded or stretch goals and things like that. You can set it up very much the same way that you would set up a crowdfunding platform. A nice benefit of this is that you do get the money. Immediately if somebody goes and buys your game, which is sort of like backing your game, you get the money. If you set up a Kickstarter for $5,000 and you make $4,999 on the campaign, you don't get any of it, right? It's an all or nothing sort of thing. And yes, Pachito, exactly. It's available in more countries. Many people don't have access to Kickstarter and other platforms like that. And so itch is more widely available. And so it's a more accessible form of crowdfunding for people. Also, generally, like the stakes are lower. And what I mean by that is like the stakes on your brain. Running a crowdfunding campaign can be exhausting. And that's not to say that isn't going to be the case with an itch fund, but it just, I don't know, I've done it and it feels a lot better. It just feels better than like staring at a Kickstarter page. And the cool thing is with a an itch funding thing is that you can set up like an Ashcan or quick start version of the thing. So people can go and buy that, knowing that eventually you will add the final files to that itch page when you fund and make the game, and people are going to get the game when it's made. And you're probably going to post your stuff up on itch anyways. So why not just fund it there? Obviously, though, this is a bootleg system. This is not how itch is designed to be used. Itch isn't a crowdfunding platform, so you're not gonna get the same marketing and automated messaging systems that are going to benefit you as you're going to see in Kickstarter, BackerKit, things like that. Less control of Kickstarter to give the money to one, right? I'm not sure what that question might mean, but Cheeto, if you could sort of clarify, I'd be happy to try and address that. The one other thing that some people asked about was, hey, what about getting other people to publish my game for me? I don't want to run a Kickstarter. I can't run a Kickstarter. I don't know how to do it. Or I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. I just want to write the game and pass it off to somebody else. Those options exist. Couple things about that. There are people out there who will take a game and they'll take just the rules, and then they will put together, they have a team of people who will do the layout and the art for it. And then you will have some sort of arrangement on how the kind of the splits, the royalties of it go. That exists. There are a couple that I know, a couple places that I know that do that sort of thing. There are other people who will run a Kickstarter for you. They won't do all the other stuff of like getting the artist and the layout. They sort of expect game complete. But if you're, for example, in a country where you don't have access to Kickstarter, they might run the Kickstarter on your behalf as sort of like a proxy. And then they might also help with fulfillment and things like that. But they're getting you onto the platform in the first place. Generally speaking, this happens a lot less than crowdfunding your own thing. If we're specifically talking about you making your own game, like your own thing, not supplements for other games or third party things and stuff like that, that's a different story. But if you're like, I made a game, it is my game, it's separate from other games, there are some options for doing the other publisher thing. I think I would generally push people to try doing itch funding on your own than doing that, unless you're really set on doing like a Kickstarter and you just want somebody else to do it for you. There are options, and I would talk to you about that, in another way, rather than just like shouting out places, because I don't want those places to get inundated with requests. All right, next up was play testing, which is the thing a lot of people were curious about. How do you get play testers? What should play testing look like? All of that sort of thing. How do you find play testers? There's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Certainly you could just join some Discords that are sort of focused on that, or a lot of people who have their own sort of like personal Discords have play testing rooms and things like that for anybody who's working on stuff to connect with each other. So, this is a thing that I had a hard time talking about, which is Discord servers are helpful. I don't like being in Discord servers anymore. I found it really helpful early on, but I don't like being in them now. So it was a hard piece of advice to give, because it's like, I don't do this now, but I did do this. So Discord servers can be helpful. Playtest trading. So this could be really helpful. If somebody is asking for playtesters, you offer to help them, and then like, say like, hey, I'd be happy to help you playtest. Could you help me playtest my thing? Pretty common. Local shops, you can try doing that. Whether or not they even support like indie play is a different thing. Conventions are an option as well. There are, conventions you can host events and things like that, and there are also conventions that are entirely devoted to play testing, or have a very heavy emphasis on that stuff. That's not a unbelievably cost-effective way of doing it, because you have to pay to go to a convention. But if you're already going to a convention, you might consider trying to run some events there that are playtesting your game. At this point, I have a group of people that I kind of consistently will reach out to for playtesting, just because I have done this long enough that I've built that sort of connection. So that's what I told a lot of people, is it's about finding those initial connections, and then when you find the people you gel with, you'll probably just keep playtesting with each other from there on out. Something that I really emphasized to people was to do a very focused form of playtesting, rather than, hey, we're going to just play the game for 2 hours. Especially if your game is a new one, in new development. The way that we talk about it in my server is called the Danger Room. That's specifically for combat stuff. It's called the Danger Room because it's the X-Men would go into the Danger Room and just fight like meaningless things to learn how to fight each other. Danger Room playtesting is just combat with no coat of paint on it. We don't care what the enemies are. They don't have names. They don't have descriptions. They're just numbers. And we're fighting over and over and over again. What I find to be more effective is to do one subsystem at a time and do it multiple times, rather than trying to do a bunch of subsystems at the same time. So for example, we're going to sit down and we're going to do 3 to 5 fights, or we're going to sit down and we're going to do character creation 3 to 5 times. And we're going to try to build characters that have this role, this role, this role. Can you make a broken character? Is there something after the 3rd iteration where you're like, I feel like I'm missing something from my character, etc., etc. And what you can do with that is you can either collect like 5 pieces of data and look for trends, or between them, you can make one small change and then run another thing and see how does it feel after that change, right? That's the scientific method, is you don't make a bunch of changes between playtests. You make one change. And then if that one change made things better or worse, you can generally be confident that, okay, that was something that I should or should not do. Let's run it again. And then let's see if we need to make another change. Iterate, iterate, iterate. I find that infinitely more helpful than We're going to sit down for 3 hours. We're going to run character creation. We're going to run some social stuff. We're going to run one fight. I hope we get through all of that, and I hope that we remember the rules the whole time, and I hope that I got enough data from that 3 hours. But really, you only got like one piece of data from each of those subsystems in 3 hours, as opposed to like running 3 fights in an hour, and then you're like, okay, the combat works, or oh wow, the combat doesn't work. I need to change it. Taking feedback, or how do you get feedback after these play testing? Two big things that I talked about is ask for focused feedback. So just sitting there and going, so what did you all think, is going to be really hard for people to give you feedback. People like being asked specific questions, even if it's something as simple as, can everybody give one rose and one thorn? Meaning like one thing that they really liked and one thing that was sort of a pain point during the playtest. That's more helpful than just saying, what did you think? What did you think is just too open. People are going to struggle to answer that question in a meaningful way. So ask focused questions. It can certainly help if you have questions written out ahead of time, or even if your playtesters are willing, send them a small little set of questions and say, hey, when you get around to it, if you could fill this out, it would mean a lot to me. That can be also helpful, so that it's not like immediately after you've playtested, now we all have to sit around and like talk about it. It's helpful when it's fresh, but sometimes people, like, if you just playtest it for 2 hours, be nice to your playtesters, release them, let them go off and live their lives, and say, hey, in the next week, can you just answer these questions and get that focused feedback? The other thing is to learn to ignore feedback as well. Feedback comes from a bunch of different places. It really depends on who you're running it with, right? So if you're running and you're just running with other game designers, they're going to think about the game in a particular way. They're going to read the game and play the game in a particular way, compared to people who aren't game designers, who are maybe like forever GMs. And they're going to play the game differently than people who are like forever players. So you have to kind of keep in mind who you're getting the data from, and think about how much do you weigh that particular population's thoughts on things. And also, you just have to learn that there's going to be people who are going to try and give you advice on like how to completely change things that you can just ignore. You can just say thank you, nod your head politely, and then move on. Experienced this a lot when I was doing board game and card game development before RPGs. We would go to these playtest events that are in like the Chicago area called Protospiel. Protospiel is it's specifically about playtesting board games and card games, and you get all kinds of interesting people, and lots of people would want to play the game and then try and completely change your game. And you had to just kind of learn to be like, all right, thanks for the feedback. And in your mind, you're going, I'm definitely not going to do that. But at least to the person, you're like, all right, thanks. I think I agree, BLG. BLG says that to some extent, feedback is the least useful part of playtesting. I agree. I think feedback can be valuable. It can be helpful. But I think more of the like your own intuition and aha moments of inspiration that happen during a playtest can be more valuable than hearing direct feedback. Because even if somebody has a good idea, sometimes we have a hard time articulating it. So yeah, that's playtesting. Community. How do you get into the community? How do you find community? Things like that. It's tricky. It's tricky. At this point in time, I know a lot of people because I've been doing it for a long time, right? I've been doing it for 5 years, which, compared to some people is not long at all, but for me, it's a long time. And so I've just had the opportunity to interact with people and meet people. Going to conventions is a huge part of that, either to meet people for the first time and or like find people that I had exclusively interacted with online and then now see them for the first time. It's really nice. But how do you get to that point in the first place? again, this comes back to my issue with giving this piece of advice, which is Discord servers. um, Admittedly, when I was first doing this thing, one of the most important things that happened to me was joining the Brain Trust Discord server, which is put together by Adam Vass and Willie Opes, two incredible game designers, two great friends. They weren't friends of mine in the beginning, didn't really know them. But I got to know a bunch of people who are cool indie designers from that space. I got to learn a lot from people, and that Discord server, I think, is really, really important to me developing to the point that I am today. Um, like I said, though, today I interact with virtually no Discord servers. I barely even interact with my own Discord server. That's just a personal thing for me because I have a hard time being chronically online. It could be challenging for a whole host of reasons, but it was really, really helpful in the beginning. Obviously, there are other ways to get connected with your community, like local groups and things like that. That's especially helpful if you are part of if you're in like a large metropolitan area. Like I live in Chicago, so yeah, it's super easy to find people. There are so many designers in Chicago, in and around Chicago. So it's easy to create community. It's harder if you're not around a lot of people. Um, so yeah, community was a hard one to kind of talk about just because at this point I've sort of distanced myself from a lot of the ways that I used to do it, and now I sort of have the community that I've met, and I occasionally just glom on new people by just like meeting them in person. Usually meeting people in person is how I connect with people from a community standpoint. Turbo Tango, yeah, totally agree, right? Focus for feedback should be on symptom notes, like I was confused here, or this didn't feel good, as opposed to diagnosis, like the math is off, or prescriptive, like you said, increased damage by 2. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way of putting it. I like that categorization that you're using of symptom, diagnosis, prescription is that's a good analogy. Great, very well. I like that a lot. Um, Mistakes that I made early on. What were some mistakes that I made early on that folks can try to avoid? There's two that are on the thing, and then I just thought of a third one. One was trying to do too many things. Just trying to do way too many things at once. I still do that thing though. That's the problem. Is a mistake I made early on, and I continue to make today. Is I try to have too many projects at once. That is nice for me in some ways because if I get tired of working on something, I have another project I can jump to. But it also means I like everything is slowly making progress as opposed to like one thing is just getting finished. um, the other thing is to embrace like good, not great. I did that really well in my first year. In my first year, I released Corvid Court, that a game that I wrote in 48 hours is a sort of a fever dream about crows doing crime. I wrote it black text on white background and some stock art images, and that was the game. It is still one of my favorite things that I made. Light was a one-page game that had very, very minimal graphic design layout skills applied to it. But I released it because I was excited and passionate about this thing. And that was another thing that I wrote like in like a weekend. There's sort of a trend here. And then as I got like further into this, I started seeing these things as like full-blown projects slash products, and it has to be perfect. It's got to have all the right graphic design. It has to have all the right art and everything like that. And that would just ultimately slow down the production of these things. And I produce a lot and I produce quickly, but I keep talking myself out of projects that I think I would have kept going on because I couldn't find a way to make them great rather than just simply good. And this is even something that like Adam Bell recently talked to me about, how he said like I think a game actually has more success if it has like something that's a little wrong with it. Like there's just a little stink on the game, instead of it being polished and clean. Like a polished, clean game, and you're like, okay, that was good. It was well made. But like, and I think he's kind of right about that. Um, so I think that's just an interesting idea. And so especially since I was mostly talking to people who were early on in their path of doing design, you know, don't try to make the 400-page tome that's going to be, it covers everything and it has all the perfect art and all of that sort of stuff. Like, it's just, you're never going to get it done. You'll never finish it. It'll never be exactly what you want. Um, just make shitty games, and it's honestly really, really fun and really satisfying. Um, Forlorn Plushie, related to the idea of you should make art for yourself and six perverts. Yeah, exactly, right? Like when I made Corvid Court, I was like, there's probably people out there who love the idea of birds doing crime. And yeah, there are. There's just weirdos who like crows and crime. And it's like, yeah, cool. We all found each other because I made that game. Um, so yeah, that was another thing. The one other thing I just sort of hit that I remembered is, there were also plenty of crowdfunding mistakes that I made along the way. Um, Real quick, rapid fire crowdfunding mistakes that you shouldn't make. If you're doing a Kickstarter, don't if and you decide to collect shipping during the campaign, which you can do, just remember that shipping money that you're collecting is going towards the goal money. So if you've budgeted your goal to sell 100 copies of something, but you actually reached your goal because you sold 70 copies plus the shipping on those 70, you didn't make enough money for 70 copies or for 100 copies of the game. You made enough for 70 of them. So make your goal bigger if you're collecting shipping during the campaign. You could solve this, of course, by doing things like backer kit, but that's a whole other thing that you have to learn that. Keep your crowd funds simple. Don't do a bunch of add-ons and things like that. Don't do a bunch of confusing tiers that are going to be a nightmare for you to try and figure out. I did that once where I had like 4 different add-ons that you could do, and so trying to put together the packages, the different combinations of books, which meant different size and weighted packages, was a nightmare compared to, here's the book. I know how much it weighs. I know the package it will go in, which means I know exactly how much the shipping is going to be. Do that. At least if you're early on, do that. And I am certainly embracing that idea late on as well. So that's another thing that comes to mind. Be really careful about shipping. Everybody I know has taken a wash on shipping costs at one point or another, typically with international shipping. My big example was when I did the Slayers campaign, and I used Mixam's estimated weight for a book to calculate how much it would cost to ship, and the estimate was not correct. The books weighed more. And as a result, it went from this tier of shipping price to this tier, which basically raised the price of every international package going out by $10. And so if you have a bunch of international packages going out, that adds up very quickly. So just be careful with shipping. My very first campaign, I only shipped to the US because I was like, I can understand. So maybe start small as something to consider for your crowdfunding stuff. I think those are the major crowdfunding things that and it doesn't hurt to throw in, this isn't a mistake, but this is just a fun Kickstarter advice. It doesn't hurt to just make a tier that is the throw more money at me tier. Don't make like $100 tier that is going to require you to do a shit ton of extra work. That's not worth it. But do you want a signed copy for $100, or I'll do this really small thing for $100? There are people who will just want to throw money at your campaign because they think the game is cool. Let them do that. People aren't going to be busting down the door to hit those tiers all the time, but hey, every one of them helps, and those are like your super fans that you should be connecting with and be friendly with and stuff like that. The last thing was conventions. How do you get into these things? Which ones do we go to? What should you bring if you are going to be an exhibitor at a convention? So I have tabled at 3 conventions. PAX Unplugged, Gen Con, and Origins. First piece of advice, don't go to Origins. Origins is going to be a complete waste of your money. Origins is definitely more of a board game focused convention, and it is definitely more of a convention focused on industry and or also people who just want to play games. Um, so it was a nightmare. Origins sucked. We hated it so much, and we'll never go back. So yeah, that's my piece of advice on Origins. There are other smaller conventions that you can go to, like local conventions, that might be worth it. You just have to think about how much is the booth cost and how many books or zines or whatever do you need to sell to cover that cost. And if it's a local, then hopefully you can just sleep at your place of living. But if you have to drive to one of these places, keep in mind you have to factor in things like gas, hotel fees, food, all of that stuff to determine if a convention is worth it. For me, I only go to conventions that I can drive to, because you have to bring a bunch of stuff. These conventions vary greatly in terms of what they provide for you. Gen Con provides a table and 2 chairs, which is great. PAX gives you nothing. PAX is decidedly cheaper than Gen Con, but they don't give you anything. So you have to bring all of your tables, which is that much more stuff that you have to carry in your car slash van slash whatever it is that you're transporting with. Because we have to drive places, I'm limited to where I can go. I'm not going west of here. I'm not going to Big Bad Con to sell. I'm not going to OrcaCon. I'm not going to places like that. I might go to like hang out, but not to sell. Because I'm not going to drive my car to the West Coast. I will drive it to Philadelphia, which is as far as we're willing to drive, because it's more manageable. What do you need to bring to these things? Then we'll come back to which ones and how to get in. You need to bring tables, like I said, chairs, some sort of display solution. My very first con, PAX Unplugged, we just had a table and I brought 4 games. I brought 100 copies of each game and we just stacked them on the table. And that worked. It was completely fine to do it that way. You don't need a fancy stand or setup. Fancy stands and setups are nice and it draws people in, but it is not necessary. You will not know how many books to bring the first time you table at a con. I certainly didn't. Like I said, I brought 100 copies of each of those games. Didn't need to bring that many. I now have a spreadsheet that has tracked each individual game, how many copies I sell at each convention, so that I can get a general sense of the range and averages of those things, so that I'm much more thoughtful in terms of which games I bring, which sell, and how many. There are some games that you will find of yours that sell better at conventions than they do at other places. For example, Rigged and Time to Kill are 2 of my solo games that sell really well because people at conventions want solo games. And if you can just say, you're an assassin waiting for your target to show up, so you're killing time before it's time to kill, people go, I'll buy that. But that game is so low on my list of games to talk about online with all my other bigger things that I just never talk about it. So some of your games you'll find that you think are going to do well, don't. And then some of your things that you don't think are going to do well, do. How to get into these things and which ones to go to. PAX, if you can get into PAX, that's 100% the one that I recommend. It's my favorite one. It's so much fun. PAX really, from like an attendance perspective, is a good size, and those folks want to buy. They come to buy things, and they come to buy indie things, which is really cool. PAX is really good about putting the indie RPG people generally near each other, which allows us to be like, oh, I don't have a duet game, but if you go right over there, that person has 3 that you should go buy. And it's really helpful when we're kind of close to each other. Gen Con is it's huge. It's a numbers game. The numbers are going to be in your favor, but you have to endure Gen Con. It's 4 days. It's 1 extra day than PAX. It's way more people. It's exhausting. But it certainly can be worth it. It is easier to get into PAX than it is Gen Con in terms of a new applicant. I think PAX opens up applications for the upcoming year, usually like in May, I want to say, is when like the new applicant thing opens up. I don't remember when it is for Gen Con. The thing is, if you get into either of these things, you want to kind of consistently keep going to them, unless it was such a bad experience that you don't want to go ever again. Because once you're in, it's a lot easier to kind of keep your spot. So like, I'll never give up my Gen Con spot because I'm in, and it was hard to get in the first place. I'll never give it up. Even if I can't attend, I will send people to go for me. The new one that I'm trying to get into is Gamehold Con. Really excited about that one because it's very close to me. It's in Madison, so it's an easy drive. I wanted to get in last year, but I learned about it too late, so I got on the wait list, and they were all filled up, which is totally understandable. So I applied the day the applications opened up this year, which was like 4 days ago. And I'm hoping that I can get to Gamehold Con this year. It would mean that the 3 conventions I attend are all in the second half of the year, August, October, and November, December, which is interesting, but it is what it is. The one other thing I'll say about 2 things I'll say about conventions. 3 things I'll say about conventions. 1, bring people with you. Don't try to run a booth by yourself. That will suck. Most conventions give you extra exhibitor badges. Use those to bring people with you. 2 is it helps to have like a new game when you go to a convention. Like especially if you're a somewhat known entity or people are aware of your stuff, because I have so many people who come up to my booth and say, "What is your newest thing?" Or "What have you released since we last saw each other last PAX?" And I can say, "Oh, Hunt is the new thing that we did this year." And that was at Gen Con last year. And we could say Hunt is new, and people go, "Oh, cool, I want the new thing." It's not required to do that, but it certainly can help. And the third thing I've already forgotten. I know I said there were 3 things that I wanted to last things, but I've forgotten it. So maybe future Spencer will remember and put it in a comment or something below, but current Spencer has forgotten it right away. So yeah, that's conventions, and that's generally speaking what we talked about during office hours these last 2 weeks. It was a lot of fun. Like I said, I really, really enjoyed doing it. I probably won't do it as open as I did before, just because, as I alluded to in the very first bullet point, we're having a kid, and that's gonna mean I don't just like randomly hop onto 30-minute meetings with strangers online. But I am I do game design consulting and crowdfunding consulting from like a professional standpoint, that I can set those things up, but I probably can't do the open door office hours so much anymore. But it was a really, really good experience. I had a great time. Like I said, if you have questions about any of the stuff that I mentioned here, feel free to drop them in like the comments on the VOD for this, and I'll try to get around to them. I'll try and answer as best I can. But hopefully some of this was helpful to you. I had a great time, and I'll see you all around. Bye.